Alright, so welcome back everybody. Today we're going to be making a little player projectile here. And this projectile knows what direction it should face. It even is capable of going diagonally. So, hang around and let's get started. So getting started here, the first thing I'm going to do is import some art that I made for this project. You can find a link to the art in the description down below, and I mean it really sticks out. So it's, it's nothing perfect, but this is just going to be for the bow and for the arrow. This video is going to be split into two different pieces. This first piece is going to be just for the arrow, and then the second part is going to be for having the arrow be something that's not unlimited, having to be something that's conditional on you picking up the bow. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the art that I have put into this project. Okay, so I just have some really simple sprites here, one for a bow and one for an arrow. I'm going to be messing around with the arrow today, but while I have them both open, I might as well control select them both, set the pixels per unit to 16. I'm going to set the filter to point, no filter, and the quality to, or no, the compression to none. I'll apply that. I'm going to drag the arrow right into my scene here. Oh, maybe. That's weird. Is it, yeah, it's a sprite. I was having this weird issue the other day too, because it's giving me that weird arrow instead of the, there we go. That's weird. I must be doing something wrong. Anyway, I'm just going to add my arrow to my scene here, and I'm going to put it right near my player. Right now you can't see it because of the way it's sorted, so I'm going to put it on the breakable sorting layer so you can see it. And I'm going to make this a prefab right away so that I can do some modifications to it in the new prefab workflow. If you're not using 2018.3, you can still do this any other way. I'm going to put this in the object prefab, so I'm just going to drag it in and then double click on it. So the arrow I want to move, so I'm going to click add component, and I'm going to add a rigid body 2D. In general, Unity doesn't like using physics with anything that doesn't have a rigid body. We've talked about this before. I'm going to set the gravity to 0, and I'm going to freeze the rotation through physics. I'm going to set the sleeping mode to never sleep, and the collision detection to continuous. Okay, cool. And got my gravity scaled to 0, so we're good. I'm going to leave this dynamic. I'm going to add another component here. This is going to be a box collider 2D, and then I'm going to make this a trigger, and I'll edit the collider. I'm going to make this slightly less than the actual arrow itself, so about that wide, and I'm going to pull this back just a little bit. And that's just in case you want to do that trick that Zelda does, where for a small amount of time the arrows stick in what you're firing them at. We won't be doing that today, but that's just in case you want to do that. Alright, so next thing we're going to do is make a script for this. So I'm going to go into my scripts folder, my objects folder, I'm going to right click, create, C# script, and I'm just going to call this arrow. And I'll open that up in Visual Studio. And I don't have it open, so I'll meet you back here in just a moment. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do here is make a public variable to reference the speed of the projectile. So this is going to be a public float speed, and then I'm also going to make a reference to the rigid body. So public rigid body 2D, I'm just going to call this my rigid body. A little wordy, I know, but that's how I like to do things. I'm making it public so I can just assign it in the inspector. I don't need an update or, well, I'll leave start for now, but I don't need update. So let's get rid of that. What I am going to do is I'm going to create a method here that I'm going to call setup that is going to apply some velocity to it. So I'm going to create a, void setup. And this is going to take in two arguments. The first argument it's going to take in is a velocity, which is going to be a vector 2. I won't call it velocity, I won't call it speed either. Might as well call it velocity. It's deprecated, so it should be fine. And then the second argument is going to be a vector 3 for direction, which is the direction I want the arrow to face. Up, down, left, right, and we're even going to be making it so that it can face in weird diagonal directions. It's actually easier to do it that way than it is to make it so that it only faces the 4 cardinal directions. So what I want to do here is I want to do my rigid body dot velocity is equal to velocity dot normalized times speed. So I want to set the velocity to be normalized and then times speed. And the reason I'm doing that is so that it doesn't fly faster in some directions than others. And then I'm going to change the rotation to be whatever the direction is. So to do that, I don't think we've done this before. Even though we've moved all kinds of things around, I don't think we've actually manipulated the rotation of an object before. So to do that, I'm going to say transform.rotation is equal to Quaternion.Euler, and then you have to pass in a vector here. And the vector I'm going to pass in is direction. All right, cool. Now a quaternion, that's something that's way beyond the scope of this project. Explaining what that is, it's a way to find the direction something is facing in 3-dimensional space. When you change it to Euler, and that word, I know it looks like it should be pronounced Euler or something like that. I always have this problem with students. Euler is a mathematician who converted things from quaternions on top of many other things that Euler did. And so by giving this direction, we're going to be able to convert it from a quaternion to an angle on the x, y, and z directions, or is x, y, and z axes. So there we go. All right, cool. I'm going to save this. The next script I'm going to open up is my player movement script, because that turned into the script where I have my player controls in. So what I need to do is I need to create a public game object. I'm going to call this projectile. And I'm going to use a different key for the projectile than I'm using for the sword. So the reason I'm doing that is thinking like, Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past. You have one button for your sword and one button for your projectile. Or, if you're thinking Link's Awakening, those 2 buttons can be interchanged to be whatever you want them to be. So I'm going to save this really fast. I'm going to jump back into Unity here. Oh, and while I'm here, I might as well do a few other things as well. So I'm going to look at my arrow. I'm going to put this on a specific layer. So I'm going to grab my layer here, which currently is set to be default. So I'm going to add a new layer. I'm actually going to add 2 new layers. One is going to be player projectile, and the other is going to be player. I can't believe we've made it this far without me having a player layer. So I'm going to choose my arrow, and we're going to use player projectile for this. I'm going to go back to my scene, choose my player, and my layer for my player is going to be player, and I'll change all the children. Alright, cool. So now there's 2 things I need to do with the project settings. The reason I did that layer, and we've talked about this before, but just to remind you, Unity allows you to decide if physics should be ignored based on the layer certain items are in. So if I go to Edit, Project Settings, and then here I want to make sure that I'm in Physics 2D and not Plane Physics. I'm going to make the player projectile not interfere with player or player projectile, and might as well make player not interfere with player as well. So I'm going to save that. The next thing I want to do is on the input. Right now I have 19 axes, and the last one I created was this attack down here. I'm going to create a 20th axis, and by default it's going to be called attack. I'm going to call this, we'll call this second, I might as well do it. The convention that's already created here is that it's regular case, so I'll call this second weapon. Alright, my positive button is going to be the M key, just because that's right next to my space bar, and alternative for that is going to be joystick button 1, which I think is the B button on an, nope, didn't want to do that, which I think is the B button on an Xbox joypad. And type is key or mouse, so we're good. Alright, cool. Now going back into my script here, The reason I did that is because I already have this get button down attack, so I want to have a different button. So I'm going to add an else if here. So else if, and ifs and else ifs get executed in the order they appear. So if a condition for this else if is also a condition for this one, it's going to read this one first, and so it would go to that one before it goes to the third one, if that makes sense. So my else if here is going to be, I'm actually just going to copy all of this from the other one for the sword, and I'm going to paste it there. I'm going to change it from attack to second weapon. Do I have one too many parentheses? I do. Alright, I just want to make sure I called it second weapon. I don't know, I'm getting old. I swear, I can't remember anything. Yeah, second weapon. For like 5 seconds. Alright, so there we go. Alright, it's compiling, so we'll let it do that and not get impatient. Alright, cool. So back into Visual Studio here. Now I'm going to make a second attack coroutine, which is going to be for a bow attack. So I'm just going to copy this whole thing. Copy and paste it down there. And I'm going to call this second attack coroutine. So this is going to be for the second weapon. And we could add some states in here if we had more than just 2 weapons. The only thing I'm planning on adding right now is a hook shot, which was voted on by the people at my Patreon. So yeah, we'll have a hook shot and a bow and then the sword. So anyway, we don't want to set the animator because we don't want it to look like it's coming from the sword. So I'm going to turn those off. I'm going to set my state to attack. That's fine. I'm going to wait for seconds. Cool. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new arrow. So I'm going to create a little private void make arrow. And this is just going to create the arrow at my player's position. So I'm going to say game object. I'm going to instantiate it as a game object so that I can manipulate that setup method that we made in the arrow. I could actually even just say arrow, we'll call this arrow, is equal, I didn't call the other one arrow, did I? Alright, cool. So arrow is equal to instantiate projectile at the player's transform dot position and with just a Quaternion dot identity. So we're going to instantiate it as dot get component arrow. Okay, cool. So we're creating the arrow and we're also caching a reference to its arrow script. And then we're going to say arrow dot setup. I did not make that method public, did I? Nope. Public. So back in the arrow script, I need to make that public so I can access it from my player movement script. So arrow dot setup. And this requires 2 arguments. So for now, I'm just going to say vector2 dot left and vector3 dot 0. But we're going to be changing those in mere moments here. Okay, so in my second attack, I'm setting my state to attack. I'm waiting for a second. I don't think I need to do that. Or not even a second, but a frame. I don't think I need to do that, but I'm not going to remove it just in case. I'm going to call make arrow. So I'll save this. Pop back into Unity here. I'm going to take the arrow that's in the scene and delete it so it's not just hanging out there. And, alright, cool. I'm going to be patient. I'm not going to be impatient. I'm going to go to my prefabs, my objects, and my player script here. Let's take a look at our, where is it? There it is. Needs to know what the projectile is, so I'll give it that. And let's test this out. So I'm going to hit play here. It needs to add the bow and the arrow to the sprite atlas. which is why it's taken just a second this time. All right, so now did I call it M? I did call it M, but for some reason it's not generating it. So what am I doing wrong? All right, so I called make arrow, arrow.setup. Oh, I never called that second coroutine. So with the second weapon, I'm going to start coroutine, and we'll call this second attack coroutine. All right, cool. Save that. Jump back into Unity and let it recompile. And I'm going to hit play here in just a second once it's done recompiling. All right, what is that null reference exception error for? Inspector window. Oh, it's one of the weird Unity errors that you get sometimes. All right, cool. So let's hit play and test this out. Okay, so, oh, I never assigned the rigid body. It created the arrow, but it didn't know what its rigid body was because I specifically said I was going to set that on my own. Oh, and I didn't actually attach the arrow script either. So I'm going to open up my arrow here, which I already have. I'm going to go to my scripts, my objects, attach the arrow. I'm going to set the speed to be, I think 8 is what I liked when I was playing with it earlier, and assign the rigid body. And then just go back, save everything, and let's try that again now. So if I hit play, all right. Okay, so I did vector, did I do vector 2.left? Is that what I did? For my creating the arrow? Yeah, I don't know why I did vector 2.left, but okay, so there they are. The arrows are being created. They have a super weird angle to them though, and we're going to fix that in just a moment. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that their velocity is going in the right direction. So I'm going to make, in my make arrow method here, a tiny reference to something that we're already using. We're already using this move x and move y to tell the blend tree what state to use. So I'm going to say vector 2, and I'm just going to call this temp, is equal to a new vector 2, and this is going to be made up out of that move x and move y. And I'm just going to get it directly from the animator. That way, when I stop, it still has the value cached. So I'm going to say animator.get float, and the float I want to get is move x. And then I'm going to do animator.get float, and the float I want to get is move y. All right, cool. So I'm storing that as my my temporary, and so I'm going to replace vector 2.left with that temporary. All right, and now it should be firing in the right direction, but the rotation should be wrong. So let's test this out. So we'll hit play, and I'll start out without touching anything as soon as this is done thinking. And so there we go, it's firing down, left, right, and here's the interesting part, it's even going diagonal. Now, there's a couple issues here. First, we have a memory leak because these arrows are just like they're forever in memory. In fact, if I pause here and take a look at this one, it's already at -144. If I go to my scene and double click it, I can see that it's just like, my home planet needs me. So that's something that we're going to need to fix. We need to make sure that the arrows destroy themselves if they're past a certain place. The next thing that we're going to fix before we do that, though, is the direction they're facing. So I'm going to use a little bit of trigonometry here. And if you haven't taken trigonometry yet, just believe me on what this does. So I'm going to make a little method here. I'm going to call this void choose arrow direction. And this isn't going to take any arguments, but it's going to return something. So this actually isn't a void. It's a vector 3, not vector 2. All right, cool. So I'm going to make a temporary variable, which is a float. I'll call this temp. And I'll set this equal to mathf.atan2, which is the arc tangent of an angle. And atan2 requires a y and an x value. And for my y value, I'm going to do animator.getFloat. And the float I want to get is move y. And then animator.getFloat. And the float I want to get is move x. Cool. And that's going to return a degree measure, or not degree measure, an angle measure, but it's going to return it in radians. And so I need to convert that to degrees. And there just so happens to be a convenient little, so times mathf.rad2 degrees, which will convert it from radians back to degrees. All right, so that's just a degree measure of how much we need to rotate it. And so we're going to return a vector 3, and that vector 3 is going to be new vector 3. And to rotate it in 2 dimensions, you want to leave the x and y rotations alone, but then the z rotation around the z-axis is that temp. And now instead of having this be vector 3.0, I'm going to have this be choose arrow direction. I'm going to save that. I'm going to pop back into Unity here. I'm going to hit play as soon as it's done thinking. And yeah, this should be good. Let's find out in just a second though. Alright. So there we go. It's firing in every conceivable direction. Alright, cool. Now, let's get it to interact with the enemy really quickly. So, what I'm going to do is take a look at my arrow prefab. So, prefab objects, arrow. I'm going to add the knockback to this. I'm going to give it a lot of thrust, a relatively small amount of time, or no, a large amount of time, and then a relatively small amount of damage. So by adding that, it's going to act a little bit weird, but I just want to show you what just doing the knockback is going to do. We're going to fix this, we're going to make it better, but for now, I just want to do the knockback, so. Which, I mean, maybe that's what you want, I don't know. I'm going to go into my arrow script now, and in arrow, I'm going to add an onTrigger enter, so public void onTrigger enter 2D. And just like always, I'm going to change this from collision to other. And then I'm going to say if other.gameObject.compare tag enemy. So if it's an enemy, actually, I don't even need to do it if it's just an enemy. I can just do it always. So if it hits anything that it's allowed to hit with, I'm going to do destroy this game object. Alright, so I'm going to save that. Let's go back into Unity here, hit play. And the other thing too that you'll notice is, since I'm using that logic we already created for the sword slash, your player can't move. Like as soon as you hit the arrow key, your player stops moving. Oh, huh. Alright, well I guess I do need to add a check. So if other.gameObject.compare tag, and I want to compare with player, so if not that, then destroy this .gameObject. So I want it to destroy it if it's not the player it's overlapping with. So back to Unity, and let's hit play, and as soon as this is done compiling, we can test it. So what you'll notice too is that it'll, oh wait, is my player not capital P player? Yeah, it's capital P player. If not other.gameObject. Oh, is it the knockback script? It's weird. Even if I... Huh, okay. So let me take a look at my arrow here really quickly. I've got this as player projectile, and then edit, project settings, physics 2D. Alright, so player and player projectile. It's weird. I wonder what's making it go away. Because it wasn't doing this in my test version. Alright, I will be right back. Okay, so here's the change that we're going to make. Instead of in the arrow script here, instead of just checking to see if other.gameObject.compareTag, if it's not the player, let's make it the enemy. This will make it so it's not being destroyed by objects in the environment, which still causes an issue, but we'll fix that relatively soon. So on trigger enter 2D, for some reason it's still interacting with the player even though it's not supposed to, because I turned off their interactions, but that's weird. So if I go back into Unity here and hit play, I should see the arrows interacting pretty well with the enemies. And like I said, you'll notice that the player stops when you're firing. If you hold down the key, you only fire once. But right now there's an unlimited number of arrows that we can fire, which isn't intended. Like it's not how it's supposed to be. So we'll actually make the arrows and the bow be a part of the world in the next video, maybe the next 2 videos. This took way longer to make than I thought it would, so yeah, let's end this here. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the description down below. You can follow me on Twitter, find out when I post new videos. You can join my Discord. There's plenty of super smart people in there who had already figured out how to do this and shared how they did it. So yeah, I hope everybody out there has themselves a wonderful day. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving a like, subscribing to the channel, or telling a friend who might be interested. Also, please consider following me on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can earn access to tangible rewards, like early access to videos, backer-only videos and series, polls for future topics, streams, and even individual tutoring sessions. You can find a link to that in the description. And as always, have yourselves a wonderful day.